Hello and welcome to the Marketing Times Analytics podcast. Today I'm on with John Busby. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Alex. Thanks for having me. I'm John Busby, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer and Managing Director at Centerfield. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I'm so excited to chat about Centerfield and about your history. So, John, tell us about your background, how you got to your current role.
Thanks, Alex, for asking. I'm going to try to make a very, very long story short. I'll do the best I can. So, I'll actually start prior to starting a career. I was a debater in high school and then 4 years in college, and I was pretty obsessed with it. It involves creativity and a research-driven approach to convincing someone to vote for you, which is like writing and thinking and using data to solve problems. And I imagined my career um, uh, doing those same things for me, making me feel fulfilled in that way. And so, for the first 10 years of my career, outside of my wild first year in a startup, was in product management, which it took me 10 years to figure out didn't really do all those things for me. So I incubated a think tank inside of a marketing services company, which was like a combination of marketing and analytics. That became our main way of marketing the company, which ultimately led me to running the marketing department. We went public during my tenure there, and I learned what marketing, PR, and IR was when you're publicly owned. And I also learned how to use research and data and analytics to generate new customer conversations. I was at that company for a long time, and then after a very cool detour in Amazon's grocery division, which where I ran, I guess you could say, business intelligence. I joined Centerfield, which is where I am today, and where I get to do the things that I really love and can help the company.
It sounds like you have a background that revolves around research, you know, finding basically the correct questions to answer and focusing on maybe the larger picture rather than being like a very technical problem solver. And I want to ask, like, has that mentality helped you become a leader in analytics?
Yeah, Alex, that's a great question. I have had analytics leadership roles throughout my career without having a degree in, let's say, data science. And I think where I specialize is understanding business problems that we're trying to solve for, and then what data we can use to solve and address those problems, and then partner with analytics professionals who could take the next step and address those things with specific analytics or technical solutions. And I've also devoted a really significant amount of time and energy in understanding how I guess you could say analytical results influence what we should learn about a business. And that to me is what the role of an analytics leader is anyway. It's not necessarily doing the analysis.
That's very interesting. So really about asking the right questions, and how, if a team does not have the right questions to answer, then there's quite a bit that you can do with in terms of slicing and dicing data and visualizing. But having direction is so important when you're trying to figure out analytical problems.
It's so true. An early mentor of mine preached the question, "What are we solving for?" And I asked that of myself, almost prepping for almost every meeting, regardless of topic, but especially in the field of analytics and questions we're trying to answer with data. In almost any scenario, you or I could look at data and come to 3 or 4 different conclusions based on what we're seeing, particularly in digital marketing and analytics, where you're trying to understand the effectiveness of a test. And so it's not pulling the data or doing the right manipulation to the data as much as understanding what you're trying to solve for. But that's just so important.
So you mentioned that that you're a CMO managing director at Centerfield. What does Centerfield do for clients?
Thanks for asking. So we're a marketing services company. CMOs at the big brands that we work with, whether it's AT&T or ADT Digital Security or Allstate, CMOs always want to expand market share and acquire more customers efficiently, particularly undecided customers. And so we specialize in that. Centerfield fully manages digital marketing campaigns, and then we ask our brand partners to pay us on an outcome basis. So when we acquire a customer for them, and the incentives are totally aligned, because a CMO or a VP of digital marketing, at the end of the day, they're most responsible for more customers. And so we're paid exclusively when we're delivering those things to them. If you ask like what campaigns we run, we have a few channels where we acquire customers. One is our own digital brands. So we have websites like broadbandnow.com or security.org or business.com, where consumers find those in Google, make decisions about products, buy products, and our brand partners pay us when a product or service is acquired through that. Then we also fully manage paid search and paid social, other channels as well. Centerfield, we're headquartered and based in LA, near LAX, in a place called Silicon Beach. It's sunny all the time. And if anyone listening is interested in what we do, check us out at our website, because we're hiring.
Awesome. I'll put your link in the description.
Thanks.
So how does paid search differ from some of the other marketing tactics that a business would employ?
Well, that's a good question. Paid search is the ultimate, intent-based media or medium, because a consumer is telling you exactly what they are looking for. And so if a consumer is looking for something like the best insurance provider or cheapest insurance provider for me, in order to capture that consumer and do it in a way that you can actually make money as an advertiser, you have to have a message that's extremely specific, or as specific and enticing as possible, to the exact query that a user is making on Google. And then the experience that consumer is taken to, like a website, has to be finely tuned to get that consumer to take an action. And because paid search is auction based, and we know through economics that everyone will bid up to the price, to the maximum price they'll pay until they become unprofitable, it's highly competitive. And so at Centerfield, and presumably everybody's doing this, we're constantly looking for advantages that other companies don't or can't have, so that we can pay a higher price in the auction and capture more customers. We believe we're the best at that.
So you're talking about the strategy of figuring out where it makes sense to bid more, and instead of focusing on where do we have the most efficient bidding.
Yeah, let's take for example, you're based in the Midwest, you're based in Illinois, right,
Mm-hmm.
Alex? And
Yep.
so if let's say you're looking for a new cell phone or something like that, or a new internet plan, um, you do a search on Google that you're like, I want the best fiber plan for me. What are what are what are things that we can do or someone else can do to make it much more likely you'll buy through us? One is to make sure that the ad copy refers to fiber, maybe even refers to the fact that you're in Illinois. Then when you click on a website, it's about the fact that you're in Illinois. It has packages that are specifically about fiber, not about every single type of internet plan, and um, that any way that you would want to connect with a brand, whether it's a phone call, an email, a text, a chat, buy online, any of those things are highly personal to your query, and then also finely tuned to make sure that it's a frictionless, easy way to buy. Like there are probably 10 or 15 or 20 or 100 micro things that can be done in that experience to make it better for you and more likely to buy. And all of those things become advantages, which would allow a company like Centerfield to pay more for the traffic from Google.
That makes a lot of sense. So streamlining the customer experience and making it more tailored to the query, and to the customer's intent.
That's exactly right. And so one of the things that we've learned is, um, maybe 50 or 60 or 70% of the searches that occur for a specific topic are going to be what are referred to as head terms, meaning you're just searching for something like internet providers Chicago or whatever. And then the rest of the search queries are specific. And so if you're significantly better at taking those specific queries and designing a custom experience for those, then you're going to be significantly better at acquiring customers. And then personalizing a customer experience once someone makes a click, it becomes this cascade of little advantages becomes a massive advantage when you add it all up. And to get to marketing and analytics for a moment, all of these little advantages come from asking really good questions, setting up experiments, analyzing those experiments, and using those to fuel insights to determine what's my next experiment going to be.
Makes sense. Have you tried conquesting, as a paid search strategy, and what's your perspective on that?
I think conquesting is a great tactic to try. And just if the audience is, or the listeners are not familiar with what conquesting is, it would be like, if you're the CMO of Ford, and then someone searches for Chevy, and then there's an ad there that says Ford is better than Chevy or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. That's conquesting. I think it's important to try out conquesting because when customers are shopping, they're they could be anywhere in the buyer journey. They could be firmly dead set on buying a Chevy, or they're somewhere between you know, 99% sure and 1% sure. And conquesting is about understanding where like the weak point is in a consumer's decision making process, and giving them an opportunity to explore that weakness and offer them something else.
If there's like a shortcoming to a particular offering, and company B knows that company A has this shortcoming, then company B can bid on a query that a customer may have asking about that shortcoming, and say how company B has a better offering in that area.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And so, a motivation could be price, motivation could be style, a motivation, could be safety. And so, if you're thinking about a conquesting campaign, it's really important that you have these hypotheses about why someone might want to make a different decision, and then you're testing those different things as part of a conquesting campaign.
What is a good way to measure success in paid search?
Well, I think about it in terms of total gross profit, I guess you would say. Like and let's say take it from the perspective of a brand. So if a brand has an allowable cost per acquisition of $200, then every customer that you can acquire for less than that is, it's great. So it's every incremental customer I can acquire for less than my allowable cost. I would say you're trying to maximize that.
Yeah.
So that takes a couple things into account. Like, as a marketing leader, you have to be really tight with your finance partners to understand what a customer is worth, and then also understand that the customers you're acquiring, are they worth less than, equal to, or more than what your assumptions were, by channel, by keyword, that kind of thing. And then once you understand that, it's it's maximizing every single customer you can possibly get at or less than that amount. That's what you should be going for.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, and I'm sure it gets harder when talking about B to B versus B to C.
Agree with that big time. Um, Especially because there's so many there's so many different touch points. Let's say that a B2B customer is worth a whole bunch of money, like a million, 10 million, 100 million, or whatever. And and in order to ladder up to a large contract, you're going to um, you're going to advertise at a conference or sponsor a conference. You're going to entertain the client. You're going to put up billboards at airports. All of those different things. It's a real challenge to understand what's successful in that. It's a lot less straightforward than paid search. And Alex, I don't know if that's what you were getting at or
No, that's
not.
exactly it.
You can almost tear your hair out trying to figure out like a customer journey, especially because you're not really going to have, in many cases, like a huge sample size. I mean, it depends on the business. Maybe you're Salesforce and you can sell to every company in the U.S., but for a lot of companies, it's not like that. And so, um, So one of the ways to really try to break down that barrier is to talk to as many customers and clients as you can and try to understand their decision making process and also understand why they purchased you or why they didn't purchase you, because those can be the insights that fuel your future campaigns and to try to make a better judgment about how to attribute your marketing spend.
Yeah, on that note, what's the link between success in paid search and future messaging for content? Do you ever take learnings from what may be searched organically or maybe what's working really well in paid and then turn that into a campaign?
Well, a couple things. First of all, in my experience, paid search is often a bottom of funnel act or mid or bottom of funnel activity. Like I'm looking for a brand, or I have a query or a keyword that's like that's like I know I want to buy this service, I don't necessarily know which brand I want to buy. Um, and so in those cases, I would argue you're trying to personalize your ad and personalize or customize the landing page or experience such that someone's much more likely to buy your product. However, I will give you an example that I think is interesting. Let's imagine that um, that let's imagine you're advertising a hotel or something like that, and people are coming to the landing page and they're making phone calls, and you discover that on these phone calls people are asking a lot about the fitness center, or they're asking a lot about the nearby locations, or they're asking about the noise, or those sorts of things. Those are the types of insights that you can use to fuel other parts of your marketing activities. Like, I live in Seattle. Maybe if you find those things, you realize that the landing page should be a picture of your hotel next to the Space Needle and a gorgeous gym. You know what I mean? So there's always data to look at to fuel to fuel experiments or fuel upstream marketing activities.
That makes sense. Yeah, I see what you mean. And I think the question was slightly flawed because the goal of paid search is actually capturing demand and routing it in the most efficient way to a purchase, generally speaking. And so, like, the idea of creating a campaign from what's working should be more, upper funnel, like before that. Paid search, from my understanding, really dabbles in that, conversion, lower funnel area rather than the upper funnel.
When it comes to upper funnel stuff, I mean, we're thinking a lot right now about the subject of auto insurance. Everyone needs it. It's expensive, all of those things. And let's say you're trying to launch a brand in auto insurance. You've got to think through what's a customer's motivation. Is it price? Like, is that the thing you're solving for? Or is it confidence that, I'm not confident that I have the right plan? Or is it confusion? I don't totally understand. I don't totally understand how to buy auto insurance. And then, when you're launching a brand, it's like, which of those things are you trying to solve for? How do you connect with the consumer about that problem? And then how does your entire brand and value proposition ladder up to that and be consistent such that someone feels like they should buy through you? That's the kind of thing I think that's more upper funnel, and you can actually use lower funnel data to help see if your assumptions were right on your upper funnel activities.
That makes sense. Should paid search investment um, be increased for areas with weaker organic performance, or should paid search be kept as that cherry on top for good organic performance to really like double down on where the company is really performing well organically?
I would go I would go back to what's your what is your allowable cost per acquisition, and whether and for any keyword or query, if your paid programs are acquiring customers for equal to or less than that, you should keep your paid search going regardless of where you're at organic search.
Would you like to know I've asked this question once before to a
Hmm.
marketing mentor? Would you like to know another perspective?
Yeah, I would.
So if you increase budget for low organic performing keywords, then you are giving the incentive for different parts of the business to underperform organically because then they will get higher paid search budget. So from an incentive perspective, it makes sense to double down on strong organic performance instead of supplementing weaker performance organically because of the incentives.
Hmm. Was the motivation of that answer in internal organizational dynamics, or was it made from an economic point of view?
I would say it's much more about organizational dynamics. It's not an economic answer.
Yeah. So my rebuttal would be would be solve the organizational dynamics, because you should always be seeking to maximize exposure in organic, and you should always be seeking to maximize from paid the number of customers that you can get from below your allowable cost per acquisition.
I like
So
that.
I
Yeah. Go
yeah
ahead.
yeah. The other thing, I mean, with organic, regardless of how your paid search is performing, and I'll just say it another way, regardless of how your paid search is performing, um, increasing your organic presence is important because the cost is, your investment is a lot lower, and you're not paying Google for the media. But then again, on the flip side, no matter how good your organic is, you always want a paid program if you can make it profitable. Look at the leaders in travel. I always look at travel as as sort of inspiration, because you might have TripAdvisor, which is like number one for so many hotel related searches, and they spend a heck of a lot in Google too. So, so they've kind of thought through this and understand that they want to be leaders in both places.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's my that's my personal perspective as well. I totally agree with you that that organizational dynamics is a separate issue. I think um the the curious part of it is, can it be solved? Because you said, we should solve that before and then move on to an economic perspective, but the question is, can it be solved? Can, in an organization that's not a maybe not a startup, you know, is there a way to control for incentives that may be contrary to business growth?
Yeah, that's totally that's a leadership thing. So, from the perspective from the perspective of a marketing professional or an analytics professional, I think it's incredibly important to understand your data, be super transparent about it, and be incredible at articulating what it means to all of the other stakeholders in your organization. Um, because you should be able to come to decisions that are good for every group, and you should be able to have you should be able to have metrics and incentives that are good for everyone. And if that's if that's not if in your organization that's not the case, uh, then try to do your best with your marketing and analytics folks to to make that happen. I think transparency, KPI development, articulating what you're solving for, articulating what data means, like that kind of truth telling will create proper incentives. Because I'll tell you, the CMO only has one incentive. It's maximizing market share.
Yeah. So talking about incentives, when you bring in third parties, that's one of the big questions because third parties have different incentives than the core business sometimes. In Centerfield's case, it sounds like the way that you're set up to kind of take a cut of the customers and the sales that you bring in, that makes a lot of sense because it aligns the incentives, but not everybody operates, not every third party operates that way. Um, so the specific question is, what's a good way for a company to evaluate a third party's performance for paid search management?
Well, I'll give a couple of best practices. Um, One is if I was the head of digital marketing for a brand, and let's say that I had an incumbent agency, I had an in-house team, and I had one or more third parties that I was considering as a replacement to one or both. One thing that I would do is I would want to hire a third party to evaluate the performance of each. Um, I think and ask them to help set up a test and to do a bake off among um, among the various constituents. I would definitely want a bake off, and I would definitely want a third party evaluator, because you can pretty easily, easy is too strong of a word, but with some analysis, you can set up a paid search bake off. Um, that's one way that I would. That's one thing that I would do. Another thing that I would do when evaluating a third party is is understanding what the insights and feedback, kind of the customer insights feedback loop is. Because let's say that a third party vendor significantly outperforms everyone else. The only potential vacuum is if that third party vendor doesn't help you learn in ways that helps the other parts of your business. So as a CMO of a brand, I would make sure that there's a way to learn.
So the specifics of the bake off would be, here's a certain amount of time, maybe a quarter. Here's the budget. Let's divide it in three or however many parties there are, and then kind of see who captures the most demand. What would the objective look like?
Well, the objective the KPIs could be something like revenue per thousand impressions. Um, if you're looking at it that way. Um, you could also look at you could also look at you could imagine, that's actually probably what I would do. Revenue per 1,000 impressions. That's the most straightforward way to evaluate the different competitors. I guess net revenue, or customers acquired per 1,000 impressions. And you'd have to look at costs but I think it could be pretty straightforward.
On the topic of metrics, I heard a quote recently that I want to hear your reaction to. The quote is, once a metric becomes a KPI, it ceases to become a good metric. Would you agree?
I don't think so. I don't think so. What's the motivation behind that quote?
I think the idea behind it is that once everybody has their eyes set on increasing a number, they will resort to perhaps unscrupulous means of increasing that number, um, because it sort of becomes a gamified situation where once you know this is how we will be graded, then the individuals who are being graded will do anything that they can think of to get that number up. But that's not necessarily the point. Um, so it's almost like focusing people on a specific number has like the opposite effect sometimes that it's intended to. I think that's the logic. I mean, this is, I didn't come up with this, but I'm curious like what your reaction is, and to what part of it you would disagree.
Well, I do see things like this happen all the time in an organization. For instance, if you create an incentive to a team, like you should have a certain number of experiments per month. Folks may focus on less meaningful experiments that are easier to execute on to ensure they hit the number, as opposed to maybe a more complex experiment that can get you a better answer. That's just something that I encountered recently in our organization. But I think this totally it's totally a leadership issue. So if an organization is constantly trying to understand what we're solving for, and whether or not our initiatives, our metrics ladder up to that, and have the flexibility and willingness to change on the fly and continually improve, you won't have that issue, or that issue will be minimized. I understand now how you articulated that quote. It feels a little bit cynical, and
I agree.
and I would just say that that either try to go to an organization where that has high emotional intelligence, and if not, be an agent of change for emotional intelligence, so that you don't have to deal with that, because those are the kinds of morale killers that occur at work. When you kind of your when your brain's telling you you've got to hit this metric, and your heart is telling you it's not necessarily good for the business, that's a really bad situation to be in.
On the topic of culture, you mentioned this a couple times, that a lot of this, this is a leadership area to improve. So, as a leader, how do you approach culture and improving culture?
Well, I don't claim to be an expert in this area, but I think one thing that's really important is transparency. And so um, it's I don't know when this podcast is going to be live, but we're recording this in January, and I wrote a strategy document for our team and each of our digital brands at the end of last year, and provided it to the entire team for feedback and revisions, and the team had dozens of revisions and suggestions, which ended up improving that plan. And then all of the metrics that we have, because we have a bunch of different digital brands, a lot of initiatives, we go over them with the entire team, which is probably 40 or 50 folks, every month, and then we're always questioning what our strategy is. So openness, transparency, willingness to be wrong, willingness to take constructive criticism, like being humble, like all those things are super important in my view. They set the tone. Organizations. Another thing that I would say is most organizations have a set of values, and those values are always like like be an owner and and take risks and all of those things. Everyone has their different versions of those. It's whether or not your leaders truly live by those and demonstrate by example that that really make a difference in long-term performance and culture.
If you're worried about something in the business, let's say an existential threat, as a leader, do you have a responsibility to be honest about that?
Yeah, totally. Um, if I'm worried about like Google building something that will that will take our hurt us in some way. I don't know why I came up with that example, but, but let's say some threat. I think it's important to discuss that threat with your team, but I'm sure there are certain exceptions to that. Like there's something where it's important to maintain confidentiality or whatever. But but by and large, if your entire team knows what you're thinking, then you have more people trying to solve that problem, which is always a good thing.
Yeah, and I think another advantage is it's not, only leadership's job to think of solutions. In fact, I think it's quite the opposite, and I'm curious what your perspective is here. But I think that the way that the relationship between the different, let's say, echelons in the business operate is the leadership should be defining the larger problems to solve and the focus of the organization, and the middle management and, at the ground analyst level, this is where the solutions should come from. So really diving into where do we see the most revenue opportunity to address this issue, and then coming back up to leadership to express here's the solutions that we found. Would you generally agree that's the way it should go?
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you're hiring, if there's someone in your organization who isn't independently solving problems, they're simply taking orders, for lack of a better phrase, then then that resource is being underutilized, and you're not getting as many good ideas to come to the table. So it's 100% right.
I really like that you agree, and because this means a lot to me as somebody in business. I don't know how to phrase it, but I'm a very I don't like the idea of, very detailed job titles where everything is like junior, senior. Um, there's like all these little subdivided rungs basically, and not every organization is focused on this. Some organizations are much flatter than others. And the hypothesis I have is that the organizations that have less of a focus on the rungs and where everybody sits actually probably have more innovation, because if everybody's obsessed with the level that they're at, then they'll have a tendency, in my opinion, to discount the lower levels and apply a premium to the higher levels ideas, or the higher level people's ideas. And would you agree generally that like that flatter organizations have a greater opportunity for innovation?
I like where your head's at. I would I'd go slightly different, which is if if teammates and colleagues feel empowered, then then titles and where you sit in the office and all that stuff goes away. So I think being empowered to solve problems and is a form of respect. And when everyone feels respected and empowered, you don't focus on things like titles. With respect to how flat an organization is, I think I think for me, it's mostly important that everybody has a leader that they can spend meaningful time with each month. So that's to have your career conversations, your mentorship conversations, to have someone to bounce something off of, something that someone that you look up to. And so I think with respect to how flat an organization is, like if if everybody reports to one person, you end up losing a little bit of that ability to have a one-on-one mentor, because that person doesn't have time to have meaningful conversations with everyone. So it's a balance. You got to kind of solve for both things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so you're saying generally that the issue of the discounting of ideas is more a factor of the empowerment of the individuals at the organization rather than the titles. The titles are more of a symptom, focusing on the titles rather than the core issue, which is empowering people to feel ownership over the business and to feel the respect, that they will be listened to if they're thinking about new innovations and new solutions for the business.
That's right. That's my opinion anyway.
I really like that, and I think that there's a lot of truth to that. So thank you for enlightening me and the audience.
Sure thing.
Um, so how what's the difference between branded and unbranded paid search activity?
So, so a branded paid search is when someone includes your brand or a competitive brand in their search term, and unbranded is when that doesn't happen. So, searching for Allstate versus searching for like cheapest auto insurance. That's the difference. And so with branded search, the customer experience is reinforcing why a customer why a customer search for your brand in the first place, and then taking them on the right path to buy. And then an unbranded search, it's well, I guess it depends on where you're coming from. Because a lot of what we do at as Centerfield is provide comparisons. So that's a little bit of a different case than if you're Allstate and you're asking yourself, should I bid on the term cheapest auto insurance? I think if you're making that decision from the perspective of a brand, you you just want to ask yourself, if I want to bid on the term cheap, do I really have a brand pillar that ladders up to that or not? You know what I mean? And you could let the data tell you that question, but I think it's also a good marketing question to ask, which is, just because someone's searching for your service doesn't necessarily mean you should try to bid on that term.
That makes sense. And I think to add to that, unbranded would probably come more in the beginning of the customer experience when they don't have a clearly formed consideration set. And so maybe they're searching for, the category that your business exists in. And then branded search would be mid or even lower funnel when they know the different players and they're doing more research and they're getting closer to a purchase.
Yeah, that's right. And I think also, if you're a marketer for a brand, and there are these kind of jump ball keywords, I think the question to ask is, do you want to focus on advertising your brand in those cases, or do you want to focus more on where consumers will make a choice? We've talked about travel and hotels and stuff like that. Um, if you're Marriott and someone's searching for the best hotel, Seattle, do you want to focus on paid search there, or do you want to focus on your presence on TripAdvisor, Expedia, and those sorts of places? Because that may be where the fundamental customer decision is going to happen, and you want to focus your budget or your time or your energy in those types of places.
That's interesting, and I think that that leads me to think of the idea of marketing landscape, or at least the customer
Mm-hmm.
activity landscape, and where things are happening. How do you know the behavior of the customer as they go through the funnel? Let's say they're going on Google, but they also go on different websites for consideration. So as a customer moves through the funnel towards conversion, how do you know what paths they're taking?
Well, on your own corporate website, you can try to you or brand website, you can try to derive that. Like like let's say that you have a website and you have some pages which are answering like research questions, some which are at you know answering customer service questions. You have all these different types of pages on your website. And let's say on every single one you decide to put like a purchase call to action. Well, the all the pages that nobody converts on, you shouldn't say those pages are worthless. Instead, maybe remove the purchase CTA and try to imagine what the customer is trying to solve for and where else they could go on your site to take the next step. That doesn't necessarily answer the question of like what people are doing before they get to your website, but that's a way of thinking about it and can really inform your organic search strategy, among other things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you think that there's ever opposition to taking away a CTA from a page that is lending itself to a more mid-funnel page, but people don't want to give up the opportunity to close people or convert people?
I think yeah, I think there would be opposition if you didn't make a good case. I think there needs to be a forum for open discussion about learning from users and like how can we learn from this customer insight. One approach, let's say there's this one page on our website that only 1% click on this the call to action, whereas every other page it's 5%. I think the bad reaction to that is, oh, we just need to make the CTA bigger. um, and the good reaction to that is let's try to understand why customers are on this page, and then we can make a better decision on what to do.
Would you say that the perfect marketing mix and balance between different funnel stages and bidding on different kinds of keywords, that the improvements need to be in a step change fashion, in a small step fashion, rather than imagining like a totally different balance that is optimal?
I like where your head's at there. I struggle with that a little bit because um, because sometimes like when you're making a series of incremental changes, you can kind of miss bigger picture things. I wish I could give you an example of that. I guess what I'm trying to say is when you're doing tests, every once in a while, I would recommend testing an experience that's totally different than one that you have, looking at all the data and trying to learn from it. Um, I can think of a couple of examples recently where we did something really different, and it didn't quote unquote perform better than uh, than the control in terms of conversion, but we learned things about users that fueled better experiments against the control. I don't know whether that's too vague of an answer, um, but I do think you want to make step changes, and I also think you want to try to shake up what you know by doing a couple of big tests here and there.
For some reason, that made me think of an idea I had in the past of a web page that is basically run by an AI, and it's just a one page website for a company, and it just asks the user a series of questions, maybe one or two to start with, and then compiles information that's relevant to the user. So it takes the customization thing that we do with A/B testing and with dynamic landing pages to the next level, where it's only dynamic, rather than like a preset group of variations. Do you think that's probably
Hmm.
where websites are going? Where instead of the user navigating, the website is navigating and just asking guiding questions to the user?
I do think that's a great experience. Like if you're asking user a set of discovery questions and and then you're customizing an experience based on that. I know that's not exactly what you said, but something that was figured out in the telesales space a long time ago is when you're calling a phone number, ask right away if you're calling for sales or service,
Mm-hmm.
because when you do that, you make things much better for the user and for yourself. Um, and I'm seeing a lot of lead generation websites try to do that, not fueled by AI, but just almost trying to qualify why someone is at a page really quickly, um, which which makes a shopper, in my opinion, feel like they're being listened to and heard, which is another way of saying you're customizing an experience.
Yeah, this is all so interesting. I'm sure we could go on, but I think this is a really good. This has been a really good discussion. Thank you, John.
Yeah, you're welcome, Alex. Thanks a ton for doing this.